Hello, everyone. Let's get started after a little delay so everybody can have a couple more minutes to wake up and get a cup of coffee or something. My name is Walter van Kutsch. I work on the Internet Explorer team, and over the past 2 years I've been working on the RSS platform and the feed reading view in IE7 that was launched in last fall, as well as shipping in Vista earlier this year. So before I get into how we're actually making a whole lot of money here, and I tell you right ahead of time, the way to make money with RSS is you send me $45 and I'll send you some booklets, and that you'll make money that way. But let's start out with RSS a little bit more on the, catching a couple of people up. Most of you, I presume, probably know a whole lot about RSS already, but for the people that might not, I just figured I'd do RSS 101 in one slide here. Essentially, RSS is a vocabulary, XML vocabulary that defines a couple of element names that are used across various different feed formats. They're using different names, but conceptually, the concept of a feed through the various formats is essentially the same. So as I've listed there's several common formats that are wildly in use. And from all perspectives, most of the RSS readers out there pretty much support all the common formats. So you as a publisher, you really need to only concern yourself most of the time with just one. Pick one and start using that. The other concept of RSS is essentially more than just the XML, but more the concept behind it is that it's a sliding window. Meaning in RSS you are not guaranteed to have a full set of items in it, but more the latest or the most recent items that either have been updated or that are new. And most of the time RSS is then displayed in a reverse chronological order, so you can start reading the newest on top. Obviously different readers allow you the ability to change the sorting order, but that is what RSS in a very, very, very high level is. I have here on the right side a little bit a very, very simple RSS feed displayed. And when I talk about RSS, I don't mean just RSS. So for anyone that's into formats, when I say RSS or Atom or feeds, I mean all those names synonymously. There's no real preference either way. For the most cases, they do all pretty much the same. They have a different structure. Some are defined a little bit differently, but otherwise they're fairly similar. So why don't I just go ahead and actually show real quickly a demo of RSS view inside IE for those of the people that haven't seen it. And you can imagine other browsers have something similar, and I'll get into a little bit what IE actually provides a little bit more than you, for example, saw in IE6 or other browsers. So back in the IE6 days, you might have come across a feed and it was just interpreted as regular XML, and the user got greeted with a whole bunch of angle brackets. Not very useful for the user, but okay, let's skip this ad here. And so in IE7, we looked at what can we do to help the user basically use RSS more effectively. And one of the things that has always been hard is actually even before you got to the angle brackets is, where did you find the feed? So as you can see, for example, on a page like New York Times Technology section, when it finishes loading here, you actually see that it's not really easy to find where is an RSS feed available. So you can scroll down, you can kind of train your eye to hunt for like orange buttons like this, but then pretty much across a lot of different applications, what has established itself as a standard way of discovering that a page has feeds or that there's feeds associated with a website is form of an RSS button. So basically you come across a page that has an RSS feed associated with it, that button here lights up, which normally is gray. And so that basically makes it easier for people not to hunt around for it. They can just use it. Firefox and other browsers basically have the exact same concept. And then you no longer get greeted with the angle brackets, but you basically get a preview of the different items that are in this feed. So in this case here, New York Times chooses to basically be a headline feed, meaning it has a teaser sentence of in each item, but not really a full content. What you also see here is the subscribe to this feed. The concept of subscribe obviously is very much the idea behind RSS, meaning it's not actually push technology, but is the simulated push technology, meaning the client actually goes out and polls for new updates. And I can get later into how there are some techniques to not actually have the bandwidth concerns and imagine hundreds of millions of clients hitting the same server every couple of hours to see if something is new. Now you've seen I just subscribed, very similar to actually adding a favorite into a bookmark. You see in other browsers, for example, that they allow you to subscribe to other applications. What is happening here in IE is actually it's not launching another RSS aggregator of that sort, but it makes the subscription into the RSS platform. And the RSS platform, I'll go more into it a little bit later, allows every application on the machine to actually access the subscription list. So the concept here is what I'm subscribed to is user data, is user specific. It's not application specific. So applications shouldn't fight over who, I want to be the master of the user subscription list. No, we basically think of it as it should be machine-wide. It's not machine-wide, but user-wide, independent of the application. And so now that I've subscribed to the RSS platform, that feed is available to any other application on this system. And you can basically see we have a little bit of word wheeling, which is also available in other browsers and displays. So that is essentially just a very quick introduction to what RSS is. You also see if I were to go and update this here now it basically highlights that everything that I've just saw previously has been read, and now if there was something new, I would only see the new items. But I think that's probably not too new for most of you. But maybe I just give you an introduction of how that is actually done. How does the browser recognize that there's a feed associated with a page? And it is, as everything in RSS, the idea is it's really simple. So in this case as well, what you have to do is add a link tag into the head section of the HTML page. And as soon as the browser detects that there's one rel alternative link of type application RSS plus XML or Atom plus XML, then this button over here basically lights up. Let me actually go in and do that real quick. Just to show you how simple that actually is, and there's really no reason why one should not actually do that on your sites today. You will find it that sometimes do it, some sites have it on some of the pages, some don't have it on other pages, and since you have the ability to actually add multiple entries into that feed discovery button, there's actually no reason when you do have multiple ones that you can show multiple drop-downs of this. So let me just here create this is just a brand new little web project here, and I'm just going to create a new HTML page on which I will insert the discovery here. While that is loading, here we go. Let's see if that is actually visible from there. So all that I basically do here is add a link tag. And obviously, if I make spelling mistakes, please interrupt me. Okay, and then I can specify the title that I actually want to have displayed in the drop-down for the user. And I obviously also have to specify what the actual link is to that feed here. So now that I save it and let's actually run this project so I can actually show that that works. So you can see that button here has lit up. Now let me actually just show you what it's like if I don't have that in here, so you believe me that I'm not actually lying to you and the button was unhighlighted. All right, so let me get back in. So that is basically the feed discovery. Coming back to my PowerPoint. Let me step back a little bit. That was basically the 101 of RSS, and I said one slide, but I added the feed discovery, which is a little bit more than just RSS, so it was a couple of slides. Now, why feeds? As publishers, you ask yourself, well, I'm already investing a lot of time in my website. I invest a lot of resources in making the design correct, making sure it's attractive for the users, making sure that the content is right. And then you look at a lot of the RSS feed, you lose somewhat the control that you have on a web page. You can really immerse the user. But that is also the power of RSS, essentially, meaning that it is a little bit less heavy on the design side, but more focused on the content. And the user can almost read it in a more stylized way without a lot of the other distractions. The other part that's been basically happening around feeds is oftentimes when you see blogs and other feeds, they have more of an informal tone to it. So it gives you a way to talk to your customers in not a very marketing type of way. I mean, you can choose to, obviously, but it basically gives you more of, lets you show the human side of your company. In general, a good way to think of RSS or using RSS is what I call the What's New newsletter. So obviously a lot of sites have the ability to let me subscribe to What's New newsletter. The user gets these emails. They either vanish in the junk mail folder or they don't, and in some email applications the images aren't displayed. So the whole experience around email newsletters leaves something to be desired. But with RSS, actually, the concept of spam can be a lot less because the user has much more control. When I sign up to an email newsletter, I don't really know where that email address will end up, and because it's kind of pushed to me, I have no way of really getting out of that. With RSS, it's an explicit action that the user takes, and the user can explicitly just say, nope, I don't want to subscribe anymore. And because it's a pull technology, the user has control, and the concept of the feeling of spam is a lot different. In general, feeds obviously are not the solution for everything. There are other technologies for other problem sets where feeds don't really work very well. What it does work well is for things that change. So news is an obvious thing. Maybe a list of items that changes over some time, or who is still left in American Idol is a list that changes over the course of time. So basically things that change over time can usually be very well represented in RSS or in feeds in general. And it also lets the user control in what interval they actually want to monitor and check on something. So a lot of times you see people, they go in at home, they want to catch up with things, they type in various web addresses and try to see like, okay, what's new here, but they can't really tell what's new, what's not new. That makes that whole concept of let me actually catch up and see what's new a lot easier, as well as since RSS is downloaded in the background and the content exists locally, it can be used in offline scenarios. For example, if I go onto an airplane or not. Let me show actually another example here. So for example, things that change, as I mentioned, is things like a top 10 list of music that happens. So for example, here's just the regular Yahoo site, and here they actually expose the top 10 videos as a feed. So as you can see here, apparently currently Fergie is #1, and obviously that list, as we all know, changes over time. Now if you think about it, what I said about feeds is next week when somebody else is #1, that #1 will still exist, which is not really what you want in that case, because you really want to have the complete set, and the ordering of this is here important. So what we've actually done with the last year, we published extensions to RSS, which we call the simple list extensions, and short SLE. And what they allow is to basically mark up a feed to say, hey, this is not, it's a feed, yes, but it has the semantic of a list, meaning where the order is important and where the complete set of information is in the feed. So in this case here, actually Yahoo Music has done this and added this or made this a list. So if we were now to continue that presentation in a week from now, I would hit refresh, and you would actually only still see 10 items and the correct one at number 1 and 2. So what we've done here is inside the RSS platform, when we're actually looking for new items or changed items and we're merging them into our store, we actually look and say, like, okay, this is to be treated as a list, and then do it appropriately. Let's see how that is actually done. Again, focusing on, it should be really, really simple. All that needs to be done is add a treat as element into the channel element of the RSS feed. So let's actually do that here real quick as well. Let me just create a very, very simple RSS or a feed here. So I just create a new XML file, and I've created a couple of snippets here that actually allow me to do creating a feed a little bit simpler. And I call this here, this is my feed. And I'm going to say this is the number 1 video of the week. And I just give it a GUID, and I'll just use that pub date. I know it's a little bit old, but I'll just say this is the video. So now that we have, that's just a very simple feed. Let me actually go in and go to the feed. We see there's 1 item, obviously very trivial. But now when I, for example, add another item in here, and now I call this number 1 of next week, and let's say I'm just going to give this here another date, and the new number 1. And basically what you see here now, the idea here is supposed to replace it. But even if I, for example, take this one out, the replacing doesn't really happen. I see here the only thing is, obviously I need to subscribe first. So let me do that in the right order here. So I'm on this feed, I'm subscribing to it. And now let's say I'm taking this one out because obviously it was replaced by the other one. Then I'm still getting both of them because as aggregators work, they keep them around. Now, as I said, we can actually now insert here the treat as a list. So as you can see, this is just a very simple extension that is in our namespace. So obviously for that, I also need to add the namespace in which that actually is defined. So that is just one of the URLs for that namespace. So now what happens when we actually show this, you still have the 2 items, but the order here is actually now important. So for example, if I, let's say, add a 3rd one, another item here, and I call this, for example, number 2 video, and I'm going to make this, get the new GUID, and I'm going to say this is now Tuesday, which would be the 23rd, I would think, number 2, and display this. Now you actually see it was added at the bottom, even though, as I said earlier, normally things are listed in the reverse chronological order. Even if I were to go and move that item in the actual feed, what you see, because we set it as treat as, number 2 is actually now up on top. And what you can see is here, as part of that understanding of what a list is, we added the ability to sort, and there is basically by default it uses the list sort order. But of course, I can also then go into date and sort by title and those kind of things. So that's basically the idea of giving a little bit more flexibility towards a feed publisher to make the RSS feed or a list work much better in aggregators. When I previously talked about why feeds, why RSS, there are basically, you want to draw in, I mean, like the whole reason why you're creating feeds is in order to give something to the user so that in the end they come back to your site, come back and have a positive experience and connotation association with your company, with your site, in order to draw them back in. So just having the ability to just read one item or read a couple of items that say like, hey, this is new, we have a new version of our product XYZ, or we're adding a new feature now, that can be useful for a lot of users, but not that useful for a whole other set of users. So the idea here is, what is it that we can actually do in order to make, once you have those items, and maybe they're not representing actually just text, but maybe they're actually representing products that you're selling or things that the user is searching for, allowing the user to actually play with those a little bit more, have more interaction with them, even within just the RSS feed. They're not coming back to your site yet, but because they can play around with, they can find the ones that are really interesting, and when they then come back to your site, they're much more willing to actually interact with it than just trying to read what it says there. So let me go and show one of those feeds here. So for example, what I've done here is I just went to Craigslist looking for an apartment in Seattle. It's always interesting to see how prices change and whatnot. But what you see here, you can get the, I've entered the search in here, and I can get the specialized feed for that, which is good, which is interesting. But so basically, I subscribe this now, and over time, I'll get new listings here. But it's not really, I would like to do a little bit more, because I have 10 items here, but I really would like to be able to sort and filter it and be like maybe sorted by the square footage or sorted by the number of bedrooms, basically things that are a little bit more than that. Craigslist hasn't done that, but another company that we've worked with was eBay, and they actually have created the ability or made it possible for the user to play with the items that are returned in a feed. So in eBay, some of you might know this, I'm just searching here for Zune. And then I'm going to see, basically once you get the search results, you will have the ability to see the feed for that. Obviously, I got to wait here. They have hundreds and millions of products there, so it takes a little while to process these and bring them as results back. Now, I think actually here's the problem is more that we're having the network latency. Let me actually see if I have here. To sidetrack, while eBay is still loading, I've actually already subscribed to the search that I was just about to do on eBay. And now you can see here, so I've searched for the Zune, and there's all kinds of different products here. Now what eBay has done is they programmed the feed, and I will tell you in a second what the mechanism for that is. They programmed the feed in order to give the user the ability to sort things by, oh, I want to see them things that are by now price. So if I basically want to sidestep the auctions, or what the auction price is, or basically I want to see like what are the things, when are they ending, so I can look at the one that are ending the soonest, or things that will end or have ended in the past in this case. And I can sort by the number of bids that there are. So for example, I see here this one has 15 bids. And as well as being able to actually filter some of these things. So 92 of the items out of the 100 here have the buy it now option. 10 of these here are actually related to Apple iPod, or at least are in the category of that. And 2 of them are on Microsoft Zune. So here I could basically now, as a user, instead of having to go through that whole list, I had a couple of clicks where I could go in and really fine-tune that. And one way of doing that is obviously creating very customized feeds on the site itself, where you let the user choose all the different criteria and then generate a feed for the user that respects all those criteria. But at the same time, sometimes I want to actually subscribe to a little bit broader, but then actually more on my own time, basically on the client side, go and do the filtering in that end, which is sometimes very interesting. So let's actually go and see how that is done. So I just took a snippet out of the feed from eBay here. And as you can see here, there's another section inside the channel element, which we call list info, that basically gives the publisher the ability to provide information about the list or the content here. And what you see here is a couple of sections that let you sort. And one of them that I picked out here is basically sorting on the current price. So there's the regular, what eBay has done is expose the current price of an auction inside an item extension and in their own namespace, which are just cut out here to make it display a little bit better. But they basically created a current price element which contains the current price. I label it the current auction price, so it actually has a human readable name, as well as I need to tell the feed aggregator that this is a number so that I can do the sorting and correctly. And I need to tell it if that's the default sort or not. The other thing that was down below on the right here is the idea of I can filter or grouping, which is basically a synonymous term for that. And here I basically say I want to be able to group on the item characteristic, which is another element that is exposed inside the eBay feed, and that's basically called option. So what the RSS aggregator here is doing, it looks through all the items that have item characteristics elements, and it collects a whole list of what are the different values in that element, and then it displays them in this order. So as you can see here in the example, it's just one, but for example, in this category here, there were actually, out of the 100 items, 4 of them actually had the listing category. Let me actually just do a quick, before I show you where the money is, and again, make your checkbooks ready. Let me actually show you a little bit how that was done, what eBay just did. So let me just go ahead here and create my own namespace, which I'll just call my, and I'm just going to give it URN here. And now I'm actually going to decorate some of my items here with my.price, for example, and let's say that is $10. And down here, I'm going to do the same my.price, if I can spell. And this here, for example, is 20. And now I have my.price. And say that this album here or that video is 30. Now, if I've done only that, basically you will see nothing, because aggregators don't know anything about these item extensions unless they're specifically targeting ones that they know. They will just ignore all the other ones, the general concept of extending XML. However, if I now add here a list info section, as I showed previously. So again, I'm using my handy snippet here, and I'm basically going to put in the defining now what I want to sort by, and I'm going to say this is I want to sort by price, and this is data type number, and I'm going to call it price. Save this here, and then I will see that here on the right side, it added the ability to sort by price. And as you can see, that is actually the same as list order. So actually, let me actually go in, because I went 10, 20, 30. So let me actually change some of these prices and actually add them in here as well in the description so we can better see this. And let's say this is $15. And we'll leave that at 30. And as you can now see, so the list orders as it was before, but now I'm going to sort it by price, and it goes 15, 20, and obviously the last one was 30 that I didn't actually type in here. So again, it's very, very simple. All I had to do is add these 3 lines in order to now give the user a little bit more power in actually slicing and dicing the information. And I can do the same thing obviously here also by adding grouping in here. Again, I need to give the, and I want to group by price, and here, and what I'm going to do is, in order to make that grouping a little bit more interesting, that we have more than one element in one, I'm actually going to change this to $20. And when I see this now, we see I can filter down, and it gives me all the different values that I have in this feed. So I can see there's one at $15 and two at $20, and I can basically hone down on these. So again, very, very simple ideas here, but in the end, it is a very nice thing for the user to actually, once the publisher exposes what is interesting about different items, letting them slice and dice, play with these items, and then have the, find the things that they're interested in, and then come back to the site. So basically, you give the user more tools that will then bring them back. So where's the money? There's obviously no direct way. I cannot give you a direct way of making money with RSS. I don't think you can subscribe to your bank and all of a sudden they send you money. Or I don't think any employer yet is giving you a paycheck in an RSS feed, which would be interesting, but maybe not today. There's obvious things that you've probably seen already in feeds. You can put advertising. Various people put advertising in feeds. There's various different providers that help you to do that. There is essentially, you can use RSS in order to bring people back to your site. And I basically showed you right now is like, how can you make your feeds a little bit more interactive? Other things that you can do is having direct links into your product pages for your items, or when you say what's new, you can basically point to a lot of different things. You could even go and point to competitor products so that the user feels like, oh, kind of like the progressive ads where they basically advertise like, hey, come to us, look for prices for car insurance. We'll show you even the price of our competitors. So basically coming back, the user has the feeling, oh, okay, this company is really willing to compete on the product, not on some scheme of trying to hide facts or hide other information from you. That might be perception, might be real, but it's one of those things that some users really play into. And obviously, you can always put the buy it now into an RSS feed. Just navigates it, and you can start the purchase process right then and there. There has been interesting discussions about the concept of a partial feed and full feed that you might have read about. I just put a little link in here. Scoble a couple days ago actually commented on this, and he has his own opinions and it links to a couple of other people, and actually read all the comments. It's very interesting for several people that are basically trying to see how can you make money with RSS besides just the obvious adding advertising. But there's the concept of, do I expose my feed just as a headline feed or partial content, where basically I have the title and I have kind of like a teaser paragraph in order to draw people back onto my site to read the entire article or the entire item? And the idea here being is obviously if I bring them, if the teaser paragraph is good enough, I bring them back onto the site, and then I can display ads and maybe get them involved into my products. Interestingly, in the discussion, and I'm not going to prescribe here what the right way is, but if you read through the discussion, one way of looking at it is a lot of the people that are using RSS today are influencers. They're enthusiasts. They know the web very well. They understand a lot of the concepts behind it. They understand a lot of the business drivers for things. And they are the people that try to go through a lot of feeds in a short amount of time. To them, having to click through to a site slows them down. It's hard for them to catch up with 500 or 1,000 feeds every day if they have to go and navigate away and get those kind of things. So those are, for example, if you know that this is your target audience, see and expose a full feed essentially, because they will appreciate your effort in giving them the full content. They will then actually oftentimes link to it, draw in other users that might actually not be either going to your site, might not be subscribed to your feeds, might not even really think about it that way because they don't really know yet what RSS is. But because someone else has basically told them, oh, here, great product that I just came across, it draws basically what I here call as the secondary traffic effects, calls them in. So the influencer get the full feed, they might put it up on Dig, stumbled upon, or whatever works for the different industries that you might be in. They're similar sites most of the time. And basically, it then draws more people back. So you can almost have people that like full content feed be your evangelist, be your voice out there that are saying good things about you and bringing people back. But as I said, there's really no way that RSS is going to make you rich quick. I wish I could get rich real quick off it, but I don't think any one of you will send me a check. So I think there's it's too early to say what are the mechanisms that work on how to monetize RSS essentially. There are different answers probably for every different business. There's probably different answers even from within your own site, which feed you're looking at. So you might actually have a feed that's targeted to one user audience versus another one. Maybe one is more broad, maybe one is very product specific. I mean, you could even imagine you have a per product feed when things change there, maybe price changes or those kind of things, or even spec changes. So in the end of the day, I think the idea here is it's still a somewhat new technology. I mean, the concept has been around for a while, but really what works and doesn't work isn't clear yet. It's different for every industry, different for every feed, different for every company. So try it. Try, see what works. Basically have the iterative cycle here. Try it, measure. Does it give you higher click-through? Do you get better quality leads coming back if you do full versus partial feeds? Is it better if you have a new post on your news feed every day? Is it, formal tone, informal tone? Basically, look at what are other people doing. See if some of these things might work. Try it out and measure. That's basically, whenever it comes to money, is usually the best way to go is follow the money in that regard. I've basically mentioned a couple of things that are important around RSS in order to give users the user experience. Certain people have a certain set of expectations around RSS, and if you publish feeds that don't meet those expectations, they will either come knocking on your door or they will blog about your company saying like, hey, can't you make this change, can't you make that change? And here I've just listed a very basic ones, but these are sometimes good to just think of in the back of your mind while you're hand coding an XML file that you expose as a feed, but I'm presuming most of you will probably have a better mechanism than hand coding it. But some of the ideas here is uniquely identify each individual item. Otherwise, aggregators will have to start guessing, is this an update to an item that already exists, or is this a new one? If it is not, then maybe just one typo change or fix will all of a sudden give you duplicate entries, which then makes the user think like, oh, this is a very bad feed. It always gives me duplicates. I can never get what I want. So avoid that. Have a pub date in there so you can get the correct sorting on the client side. Make sure you have titles. I know there's some people that, because the title is actually optional, that choose not to display the title. But if you're using an aggregator that basically is kind of like the three-pane email view of things where you just see the title, not having one and just have blank entries is usually not so good. Also, very, very important, make sure whatever you emit is well-formed XML. It's one of those things, it's very, from a higher level, XML seems very simple, but it can get actually very tricky when you want to actually embed HTML content inside the description text, that you make sure you encode everything correctly so it displays correctly. We actually, on that point in the RSS platform, have decided to reject any feed that is not well-formed XML. And one of the reasons for that is the usage of RSS is not as widespread, and it actually helps everyone if what is exposed by publishers as well-formed XML, it makes the consumption on the client side a lot easier instead of each client having to try and guess or use some kind of heuristics in order to fix up what was exposed from the server side. As I mentioned earlier, choose one feed format. Pretty much every aggregator today understands the most common ones anyway. So use the feed format that satisfies your needs. If you have something that you see in Atom that you really like, use Atom. If otherwise, use RSS 2.0. Basically, they're all, for the basic cases, they're all synonymous or interchangeable for that. Also, as I mentioned before, consider partial versus full feeds. Measure it, see what the difference is, see if you have lists, use the list as tag, and use filter and sorting control to make feeds more interactive. What else? So I basically just described some of the very basic ways of how you can interact with RSS that's just text, essentially, right? You get some item descriptions or you get kind of things. But there's more that RSS has already been used for. So the first entry here, I'm sure most of you are also familiar with, the premier example of that is podcasting, where in each item has attached an audio file so that it can be downloaded onto your mobile music device, aka iPod, and you can then start listening to it. And all that is basically an automated form for you. The other part that I've already hinted at is the item extensions. So being able to actually put semi-structured information into the feed so that an aggregator or a smarter client app can do more things with it. So just because I put the price and description, sure, is good for the user, but that's only for the user. It's hard for an application to go and pick out, oh, is that meant to be the price or not? So instead, you can put in item extensions. You can use a lot of the extensions that are already out there. You can build your extensions on top of those that already exist, like media RSS extensions from Yahoo, or the iTunes extensions if you're describing music or videos and those kind of things. So that gives you basically a way to put more information in there. And as adoption increases and various clients come around and actually can do more with that information and show them in rich ways, which basically comes to my third bullet here is, as I said earlier, RSS is not the solution for every problem out there. But it actually is a fairly good tool to use in a lot of cases when you want to actually connect what you have on the website, what you have on publishing on the server side, and actually have richer client experience that go beyond just the generic RSS readers. So as you saw in IE, it's a very basic feed reading view. But as soon as you start adding pictures to it, adding podcasts, adding contact information, adding potentially geo RSS, so location information, there are other applications that will basically start using that information, can do something really interesting beyond what just the universal readers will do. They just display the basic properties. And those things, obviously, with the additional technologies like WPF, you can imagine making a lot more richer experiences there. If you are thinking of going down that route and basically saying, okay, I'm exposing here a feed, I'm adding a lot more information to it, users don't get any value directly out of it because a lot of that information is lost in a universal reader. You can go down the path and imagine building your own client application that uses information from feeds. Now, when you do that, you basically have three choices, obviously. You can write the entire RSS fetching yourself. You can use libraries that are out there. Or, as I basically point out here, you can look at the Windows RSS platform to see if that makes sense in your case and for your application. And the reason why I say, yes, obviously, people here will ask me, come on, RSS is just really, really simple, just some XML, you do some XML parsing, what more is there to it? There's actually a little bit more to, and that's why we created the Windows RSS platform, because we looked at it, writing an aggregator, yes, it's not that easy actually, there is more to it. Fundamentally simple, things that are not as easy as doing the scheduling right, doing the download in the background, also including enclosures, making sure that everything that you pull in as feeds, you have to treat as malicious content, essentially, because it's untrusted content from the internet. Like a web page, you have to make sure you treat it as such. Just because the user subscribed to a feed that is on some server, you don't know if there's been a man-in-the-middle attack. You don't know if maybe the server was hijacked and somebody is now feeding malicious information into the feed. So, as well as then storage. Yes, you can do your own proprietary downloaded storage just within your app, but what if the user actually wants to look in different apps? So that's where the concept of the RSS platform comes in. This is basically just a very high-level overview of the different components of it. So on the bottom, you basically have the various different feeds and feeds with different kind of content, essentially, which gets pulled down by the download engine, gets processed among all the various different feed formats. The merge processor looks at and sees like which items are new, which items are basically updates to it. It also handles the case of basically quota management. How many items do you actually want to have? What does the user want to have stored per feed so it doesn't flood your hard drive with old items that you never care about anymore? And then there's basically three different stores conceptually. One is for just what is my subscription list, which feeds am I subscribed to, accessible to from any application. then the actual storing of the individual items that were downloaded, as well as the enclosures. All those three containers are accessible via the RSS object model that I'll show in a second. And now you can imagine various different client applications sitting on top of that. IE in this case is just one of these applications. It is independent from the RSS platform. So anything that you see that IE is doing and using is all publicly documented and exposed in the API of the RSS platform. Just to give you a quick little rundown of the overview of the API, again, trying to keep it really, really simple. So we basically chose 5 objects essentially that are listed on the left. A manager object where you can go into your subscription list, which is organized into folders and feeds by itself. A feed obviously contains items, and an item can contain an enclosure. There are obviously some events around, so you can subscribe or listen to events when a new feed was added. So if you have an application that wants to start processing whenever a user subscribes to a feed, you can basically just listen to these events and do the appropriate action. On a technical end, it's a COM API. Some of you might ask, why is it not a managed API? Reason being is there's still a number of applications out there that are actually not managed. Yes, a lot of new applications are being written and managed, but there's still existing applications. We wanted to make sure that existing applications can fairly easily use concept that they're already familiar with and use and start displaying feeds, which otherwise they might not ever do because they wouldn't want to actually write and go invest and do the whole downloading of feeds and managing and those kind of things. But the actual API was designed with the .NET Framework design guidelines. So a lot of things, if you're a managed developer, will feel very familiar in that sense. The only time we deviated from that is when it actually didn't work in the COM world the way you would want it to. For example, using iStreams. Those are some things that basically don't exist in the same way in the COM world. On each of these, maybe it's a little hard to read, but just very briefly, you see basically on each of these objects, you have a bunch of properties which expose the most common properties that are in feeds, as well as some methods of, for example, on an item, I can get the XML, or I can actually get just the properties of an individual item. I could get the author, the pub date, and those kind of things, depending on which is the right way for you to use it. When I mentioned, for example, why would you want to consider looking at the Windows RSS platform? What does it do more than you can just build in your own application with just an HTTP GET and some XML parsing? It is basically the background downloader. If you start, and hopefully all of you will start having your application used by hundreds of millions of users, then you want to be a little bit more clever that you're not melting the internet by making too many requests and bringing down servers by making requests all at the same time. So there's a couple of techniques here that are basically best practices that we've implemented in the Windows RSS platform. Things like conditional get and delta encoding, meaning we just use the HTTP mechanism to tell us has anything been modified, since modified, or etag, as well as if it is and the server supports it, it can just stream down only the items that actually are new and updated, reducing bandwidth, along with gzip compression that can actually make significant reductions in your bandwidth cost, as well as we're throttling requests and have assaulted scheduling. So the RSS platform by itself does not go out in a tight loop and start downloading feeds from everywhere, but basically we go and fetch 4 feeds in parallel, but also throttle it so that we basically don't request too many feeds in a short amount of time, so that we're spreading out the usage of the network. And reason being is it's done in the background. The user in the foreground might be browsing, they might be downloading the email, they might be doing other things. So we have to make sure that we're using the bandwidth that the computer has in a more nicer, in a more background kind of way. And the assaulted scheduling is the part, and that along with the progressive fallback is something that's interesting for publishers because, obviously everybody dreads the 9 a.m. Monday morning East Coast time effect of everybody hitting the New York Times page or the New York Times feed in order to see what are the news, what did I miss over the weekend. So what we've done here is by default, the feed schedule for each feed is actually fairly conservative, meaning we will update it in a 24-hour interval. The user can override that and choose a different setting, but if you just do, subscribe to a feed, that's the default setting, which works decently well for most feeds. And if a user really wants to have more frequent updates, they can change that. But what we're not doing is downloading actually feed at a specific time. So the user can't say, I want to fetch this feed at 9 a.m. Monday morning. So instead, actually the time that a feed is downloaded varies over time too. So after a feed has been downloaded, we go now and schedule it and say like, okay, it needs to be downloaded in 24 hours from now. But we're adding actually a fraction of 10% to that, and that is randomized. So anywhere between 24 plus 10% of 24 is randomized into that. So that basically over time, if you aggregate that over hundreds of millions of people, the number of hits gets spread out over time, including most of the scheduling or schedulers on a client machine always hitting things on a minute boundary. Or even second boundary. So what we do is when our background engine process starts up, we actually have a randomized delay of several hundred milliseconds to a couple of seconds, in which we basically then start downloading, so that we make sure we actually randomize hitting servers on a millisecond time frame here, because what happens is more and more computers are synchronized with clocks. We would easily run into the case that everybody hits at the same time. As I mentioned, the progressive fallback is also interesting for the publisher, because that allows when, for example, I'm making a request to see if a feed is updated, but the server currently is unreachable or internal server error, those kind of things. A naive implementation would just go back and try again. Worst case in a tight loop. What we actually do is we say, okay, we tried now, we'll try again in 5 minutes. After that, we'll basically double each time that we're going to try again, with the idea that eventually we'll basically have this error interval increasing between retries all the way up to the original interval that one was requesting. So that basically makes sure is if the server already is having problems, the clients are backing off a little bit and saying like, okay, I know you're having problems, let me give you some time to actually recover, and when you start up again, things are better. As well as we adhere to the TTL tag in an RSS feed, where the server publisher can basically like, let's say this is, I'm going to put a TTL of 4 hours in here, which means we should not retry fetching a feed within less than those 4 hours. So the user, what we even do in the UI is we don't let the user choose, let's say 15 minutes if the publisher said 4 hours. On the enclosure side, we're using the binary internet transfer service, which is a service built into Windows, which is used by Windows Update. We basically use HTTP range requests, which means it just gets byte ranges of binary files and downloads them in the background, drizzles them basically onto the machine in order to be bandwidth aware and cognizant of bandwidth usage on the client as well. Another thing to consider when you're looking at possibly using the Windows RSS platform is security. Obviously, as I mentioned earlier, feeds have to be thought of as potentially malicious content, is definitely untrusted content. So when we built the RSS platform, we were fortunate to be able to start from scratch, brand new code, that we could actually start basically with these security tenets in mind while we're already building it. And given that we're in the Internet Explorer team, we have a little bit of experience with security and what results in the last several years and lessons to be learned from there, as well as we basically try to apply lessons from email clients. So if you look at those two over the last 10 years, they had their own fair share of issues to deal with, and given that there were basically applications that had code from tens of years already around, it was harder in some cases. So we had the benefit here of taking lessons like defense in depth, making sure that we're not trusting anything, that we're verifying things as they come down before we actually put them on our disk. Those are general good security tenets. For RSS specific, we basically said, as I mentioned earlier, it's an explicit explicit subscription list, meaning the user's in control. They see all the feeds that the user is subscribed to. If they don't want one, they can delete it. They can turn off the background download engine. They're in control. It's not that some application does something that the user is not aware of. As well as I mentioned earlier, we're only accepting well-formed XML. So in general, what we basically, there's the general internet tenet that says, be strict in what you emit and be lax in what you accept. But in this case, actually, we erred a little bit more on the side of being strict in what we accept. And the reason being is it's a V1 of a product. So it's better to be more strict in the beginning and become looser over time as you understand things more and things in the basically understand in the industry, versus being completely lax and open and accept everything in the beginning, and then different security problems come up and you have to tighten it and basically lose functionality and break up existing applications. We also spend a lot of time on the validation and sanitization on the feed content. We use similar technology that is used, for example, by Hotmail in sanitizing HTML emails to make sure that there's no active content in the description fields, there's no object tags, no script in there. All these things we're basically stripping out for the whole purpose that once you start displaying it, you can be at least somewhat feel good about what you've gotten has been looked at already once. You still, with the tenet of security in depth or defense in depth, you obviously still have to treat it as untrusted content. Just because it's been sanitized doesn't mean that there's another case that can be basically surrounded. So for example, what that means in IE7, for the feed view, we actually use, when we display feeds, even though script and active content has already been filtered out, we use the feed view in the restricted zone, which means from the browser's perspective, all kind of active content script is already turned off. So even if there was a way that bypassed the sanitization, it would still not be used and displayed. And actually, last fall, there was a whole discussion where several people have created several test cases of what works, and we actually fared pretty well in that regard because we had those multiple layers of defense in depth. As well as we verify the enclosures that we're downloading, making sure they're not executables, that using the same technology that is used and exposed actually in Windows for checking attachments in email as well as IM products to make sure they're not malicious. So stepping back, I basically showed you in the very beginning the RSS 101. Then I gave you a little bit of, what are things more using the simple list extensions to have the concept of a list, have the concept of interactive feeds where you can, as a feed publisher, give it these controls on the side to sort and filter, making them a little bit more interesting, as well as then going further and say like, okay, what is it now that you might want to actually create whole applications that start consuming RSS and do more than just displaying them as a universal reader displays them. So that's basically the progression that I've talked about now. And to keep in mind, even when you go down the path of exposing a feed that then is mostly, at least in your eyes, used in your specialized app because it displays it in a very rich way, also think of there will be people looking at your feed in a generic RSS reader. So in order to be a good citizen of the RSS community, make sure that you put some thought into it, that the feed that you're exposing, even though it has extensions in it for more information, that it looks good, that it works okay in a normal RSS reader and aggregator. Also, as I hinted at several times, RSS is definitely not, or feeds in general, is not the right solution for every problem that you might come up with. Yes, it's a cool buzzword. We all like to use them, but let's be mindful of what it can handle, what it's really useful for, and not try to shoehorn it, make it do something that it's not designed for. I mean, just a simple thing that I always mention is basically streaming real-time quotes. RSS is not the right scenario for that. If you really want to do that and you have it in a local environment, use products like TIBCO, use push technology, use message buses, all kinds of other technologies that are designed for that specific scenario. Don't try to shoehorn everything into RSS. But at the same time, RSS, because it's so simple, it is actually still, there's a lot of things that can be innovated on top of it. So, Don't just do and think of the things that you see that other people have done. Actually look at what makes sense. Try something new in your area. Yes, it might not work out. Maybe 1 out of 2 will actually work, but it is still an area where there's a lot of things that can be done. And finally, to wrap up, there's a couple of resources here. We have an RSS team blog on MSDN blogs. Also point here to the documentation of the RSS platform. And as always, remember to fill out the evaluation for the sessions. And with that, I'm just going to go into questions, if there are any. Go ahead. Is that on? Can we? Otherwise, I'll repeat.
Okay. Anyway.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask, what is, in your opinion, the best practices for tracking and measuring subscriptions and click-throughs from my feeds?
There are obviously several different companies out there that provide that for you. So I can't tell you what is the best one. Obviously, it needs to see, do you want something that costs money? Do you want to do it yourself? I mean, you can start looking at regular tracking mechanisms, including looking at the user agent string. For example, the Windows RSS platform has a different user agent string as IE, for example. So
Windows RSS platform will tell my application that the user subscribed?
So you will see when the HTTP request from the RSS platform is made to your server, the user agent string will actually say Windows-RSS platform /1.0. So with that, you can identify, okay, it's actually the Windows RSS platform that is making the download request. Does that answer your question? Okay. And if you look at our blog, actually, one of the latest entries we have there actually shows you the exact user agent string. Go ahead.
Hi. Do you consider RSS publishing as a supplementary publishing mechanism to HTML web content? Or do you think it could be a standalone mechanism, publishing things that are not available in a web format, in an HTML format? And if so, do you think we could be moving to a web of feeds that is linking from one feed to another without going through the browser? And if so, how is the Windows RSS platform able to handle this?
So I can definitely imagine a place where what is in a feed is different than what is on the web page. Off the top of my head, I don't have a very good, crisp example for that. But
I do. I have one.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, for example, I have a feed that is aggregating multiple feeds that are related to me.
Right.
It's my blog feed, plus my Twitter feed, plus my Flickr feed.
Right.
This is content that is not available in one page, but is mixing all of them together.
So I mean, there's various different products out there that kind of do those things. One of a recent introduced one was the Yahoo Pipes, for example, where you can start taking different feeds, start processing them, and exposing the result yet again as a feed. Now, a lot of times you might not find that on a web page, but interestingly enough, you can create server-side as well as client-side a web page that visualizes that feed as well. So while I can see scenarios in cases where I might not actually expose things, I might expose them as a feed but not on a web page, and vice versa, the translation from one to the other on the client side or server side is actually easily done, and it depends kind of on the scenario where it makes sense. So yes, for example, I could imagine using, writing an application client side that goes in and looks at all the different feeds that the user subscribed to and basically do kind of a translation of what is the most items that are most talked about. One application that does that, the latest beta of Feed Daemon, for example, it starts looking at your things, what are people talking about in order to bubble those items up. That's similar to TechMimi and other services or websites out there that basically also try to track as what are the most talked about things. So I can see that be done client side, which then is scoped just to your subscription list. I can see it be server side. So I think in general, there's a whole overlapping, and it's harder and gets harder to really say this should be on this and this should be on this end. So client and server, it kind of overlaps and has to start working closer and closer together. Any other questions? All right, thank you very much. I think lunch is next, and the chat afterwards, which I will be attending as well.